Welcome everyone to Male Fuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the X-Files Season 2 Episode 7. It's called 3. So spoilers for the episode. This is a vampire episode. Did I read the description for this one at the end of the last episode? I don't think I did, because I was caught completely off guard with vampires. Completely off guard. I was not expecting that at all, so I don't think I looked ahead last time for whatever reason. I just forgot. And I actually think there's something misleading in this description now that I'm looking at it, because it says a character here is a vampire who, I thought the whole point of her character is that she wasn't actually a vampire, at least not yet. But more on that in a minute. So we kind of have our first stinker, really, of season 2. And it's kind of a sad one because I thought the first, 15 minutes of the episodes, about a third to half, almost half, was actually quite good. I actually really liked the opening scene. I like some of the initial investigations. I like that Mulder for once was skeptical and didn't actually think there were vampires. He thought that this was more of a mental condition, that they just believed there were vampires, and that's what it felt like. Everything we'd seen felt like that. And that's not to say that I was going to be disappointed when it turned out there was maybe something really going on with them that was at least, if not outright vampires, and something that presented some similar symptoms to vampirism. But honestly, there's a turning point when Mulder goes to a sort of goth vampire club about a third or so into the episode to investigate, and he meets Kristen, who's this sultry. She was a vampire familiar, kind of, or something. I'll get into the specifics in a bit, but basically, when she's introduced into the story with Mulder, and Mulder starts going to see her and investigating her, and it leads to a romantic night and all the stuff that happens later on in the episode, I thought all that stuff just, as soon as that stuff hit, it started rolling downhill. I wasn't in love with it at that point, but I thought, oh, it's dipping a little bit here in the middle, but I'm sure it'll pick back up by the end. No, it just kept getting worse at that point. But by the time we got to the last couple of scenes, I was so lost in how I felt about anything that was going on, about what it was actually saying about the existence of vampires, if it was saying anything at all. I genuinely was left in a place where I just didn't feel fulfilled by any of it. I was like, the opening kill scene with the sort of the rich guy with the sultry vampire lady in the hot tub and them coming in, I thought was a creepy scene. I thought that was well directed and it was solid. And I especially liked, like I said, Mulder's skepticism, because it kind of lined up with everything we were seeing. It didn't feel like they were really vampires. It felt more like just some people who really think they're vampires and are playing out like that. And that's how Mulder tackles it. And it's actually quite interesting when the one they have in custody seemingly is killed by sunlight. And they're like, how the hell do we explain this? I really enjoyed Mulder talking to the coroner who was there investigating the body. And the coroner's getting no arguments against what Mulder's saying about, oh, maybe there is some truth to vampires, because this doesn't line up with anything, that medically speaking, what other explanation is there at this point? And the coroner's like, you're scaring the shit out of me. It didn't say that exact line, obviously, but that was the sentiment. I really liked all that stuff. I was on board up until that scene. In fact, I was really into it, that scene. And then everything that came after just muddled everything up, in terms of, are they straight up vampires? Is it real? There seem to be extra weird rules in this versus regular vampires. I mean, they keep teasing a lot of the regular things, and sometimes they show it in a really fun way. Mulder says to the vampire in custody, hey, I know what can kill you. And then it cuts to a shot of the sun. And I thought, oh, that's quite a smart transition, because most people watching will know that sunlight kills vampires. It's a nice little thing. But there seems to be a rule here where only a vampire can kill a vampire. They still have to kill them in the way that a vampire would die. But this guy who burns alive, right, and his body burns he's got 4th degree burns, and it's a complete mystery to them how this happened. It shouldn't be possible. He just shows up in the back third of the episode, I guess because it was just sunlight, he just comes back. Cliche Dracula. They just always come back unless another vampire kills them. And then there's whole rules to how you become a vampire. You have to drink the blood of a believer and take a human life, and I'm like, why is there so many extra rules on top of vampire rules? Like, vampires, for better or worse, have one of the most like common what's what we're looking for? Constant set of rules of any mythological being in fiction. And for some reason, this had to add on like 3 or 4 extra things just to try and make them more surprising or more interesting. I think it would have been interesting if they were just people who thought they were vampires. I've seen a couple of movies that do that. Obviously, Martin's one, The Transfiguration's a great one that I really like. It's a fun idea, but also, you know, it's the X-Files. I get that they might want to say, hey, vampires exist, even though it feels like we're going down a mythological creature again, instead of, you know, aliens or something more on the paranormal side of things, which, you know, they've done before. Sometimes all right, and there's been some fun episodes with that kind of thing. But also, the one that sticks out in my head immediately is Jersey Devil. So maybe I'd have to go back and check, but like, are some of the worst episodes of the show going to be the ones where they tackle saying more common mythological beings might be a bit of a stretch, because I don't know how common the Jersey Devil is to the vast majority of the planet, but vampires obviously much more well known than the Jersey Devil. And it's not that I thought the character of Kristen was necessarily a bad idea. I just thought all of her chemistry with Mulder was weird. It felt kind of forced, and like they just wanted to have him fall for the sultry person, and I don't know, like the whole thing just felt kind of weird in a tone way to me, where by the end of the episode I was really questioning Mulder as an FBI agent. Like he doesn't tell any of the police that she did like show up when they were looking for her, because has suspicious, like she lived in all the different states where all these previous vampire murders happened, which makes her a prime suspect. And even though Mulder's got a hunch that's right, that she's not actually one of the vampires, because she's got a loaf of bread that's filled with blood, which apparently is a warding off. It's like hanging up garlic, apparently. I can't say I've heard that one, but fair enough. He spends the night with her, right? And then all this other shit happens that he's involved in. There's like stabbings and gunshots, and all I could think was, how are you ever going to justify or explain your presence here? This is shocking. This is shocking behavior for an FBI agent. You got laid, which good for you, but like your credibility as a federal agent, I am now calling into question, Mr. Mulder. Oh, and I even actually, one of the other things I really liked about the start of this episode, and this season as a whole has a lot more continuity episode to episode. So even though the plots are by and large still pretty standalone, or in one case a two-parter, the fact that this episode starts with Mulder like taking off the tarps in the X-Files, they're lucky they didn't like just change this into an office for something else, but you know, it's him going back to the X-Files office. He's got the poster still on the wall. It's like, okay, this is a nice follow-up from last episode. We've reopened the X-Files. That's fun, that's exciting. And then they hit us with this really murky vampire shit. Ah, dear. Nothing good happens when a character named Kristen gets involved with vampires, okay? And I realized that for the purpose of that joke, Kristen wasn't the name of the character, it was the name of the actress, but it's a Twilight joke. Accept it. We can move on with our lives. I still think that joke holds up better than half the logic in the back half of this episode. Because the gist of it seems to be, when everything sort of comes together, right? Because she's still going to this vampire club, and it's not actual vampire. Well, one of the real vampires is there, but it seems to be people who are just really into like blood fetish, right? She developed a fetish with an old boyfriend who hit her. She got cut. He got cut, and they both tasted each other's blood, and they both realized that they're really into that. They're filthy. They're filthy, dirty vampire lovers. One night, this is all backstory. We don't see any of this. She just sort of tells this story. But one night, this boyfriend brought some of these two of these three real vampires. You know, seemingly real vampires. It's still a bit up in the air, to be honest. But she, you know, he was killed by them. The boyfriend was killed by them. And Yeah, actually, is the one is the Johnny one in this? Was that the boyfriend? Maybe I misunderstood that. I think it might have been he brought two vampires and then he became a vampire, and now they're hunting her because either they want to kill her or turn her into a vampire. But she's been on the run from them, and that's why they've been in all these same states as hers because they're following her. And now they're here, and they've got a whole biblical thing going where they refer to themselves as the Father, the Son, and the Unholy Spirit. So there, you got that, I suppose. I will say, it was impossible not to think of a certain episode of the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer when Mulder went to the goth vampire club, because there's an episode in season 2 of Buffy where there's like a club of people who really want to be vampires, and they all try and dress like vampires, and it's all a little bit pathetic, you know, like the actual vampires kind of look down on them, and they're seemingly wanting to let themselves be eaten by vampires in the hopes that they'll be sired and turned into them. But it was hard not to think about that as I was seeing this sort of club, and they were playing, I think they were playing M on a projector, the old German movie, which is very good. I think it was M. It looked like M to me. It looked like the actor in M anyway. Although it'd probably make more sense if it was a vampire movie, and that was not a vampire movie. But it did look like M. Yeah, anyway, where was I go with that? I got my Buffy reference. There was also a Twilight reference in this. Oh, I wanted to say this as well. Whoever wrote this episode, which is set in like LA and Hollywood and that surrounding area, you can tell that the writers of this episode, at least one of them, because there's multiple writers listed, like, they clearly live in that area because they were naming every single street that shows up in this episode. It's actually so thorough compared to normal. You know, because obviously normally when we cut to a new state or something where the case is happening, it'll come up saying, you know, we're in Virginia, we're in, you know, New York, we're in whatever, right? And it does that at the start and says, hey, it's the Hollywood Hills, blah, 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 fine. But throughout the episode, it was just naming streets. Like, it did it like 4 or 5 times, and I'm like, okay, someone just knows this area and is just putting in all these specific locations for them to put the captions up on. It serves really no purpose. It does not matter that these are the specific places. Maybe they're thinking, oh, a lot of people know this area, so they're like, we have to be more accurate and specific. But I don't think it matters. I think this is just an area that the writers happen to know, so they can name specific streets, and that's why they did it. But it really stuck out to me. Yeah, okay. What was it talking about? I did like, you know, Mulder figures out where one of the vampires is currently working as a night watchman, and there's all these other hints as well. He works at night. The crime scene had all the mirrors smashed. I was like, okay, they think they're vampires. Not only are they drinking someone's blood, they're smashing the mirrors. And Mulder, sure enough, we have a creepy scene of him looking around with a torch, and he finds Johnny the vampire. I think that was his name. Well, he's the son. I think she called him Johnny or Jack later on. He's the son of the vampires. He is drinking out of like a blood bag, right? He's at like a blood clinic, or maybe like a what you call a bank, a blood bank. That's the word I'm looking for. He's there, and Mulder encounters him, is able to handcuff him, is able to take him in, and they want to question him, and he doesn't like the light. And Mulder indulges the fact that he wants the lights off, and he puts like a red filter over the one light that he's left on, and he's indulging him. But I did like that Mulder always felt like, no, he's just playing along. He doesn't actually think he's a vampire. It's not until, of course, he seemingly dies from sunlight, and Mulder uses this as a interrogation tactic. He's like, hey, the sun's already up, and as the day goes on, the sun's going to come through this window and it'll hit you in this cell. There's nothing you can do about it, and we'll cover it with this tinfoil. Is that what Americans call that? Did they call it tinfoil? It was a roll of tinfoil he had in his hand. I don't know. I'm realizing that Americans might not call it that. Anyway, if you don't know what I mean by tinfoil, if you're American, it's the sort of silvery, metally paper you put in the oven, right? That. We call it tinfoil. I'm just realizing that I've never heard an American say that, I don't think. But anyway, he says, hey, we'll cover it if you tell us where the other two are. And he says no. And Mulder's like, okay, well, don't give him the tinfoil if he doesn't start talking about the other vampires. But then this guy gets hit by the sunlight, and he legitimately starts burning. And he gets blisters and burns all over his face and his hands, and he just straight up collapses, and he's dead. And we get that great scene that I mentioned earlier with Mulder talking to the coroner, and them being confused. And then they find a stamp on his hand from the club, which leads Mulder to the club. And that's where it turns into all this sultry, I'm really this, I'm really that. She's actually there to pick up another guy because they're both going to cut each other and drink each other's blood a little bit. But not because they're vampires, just because they're kinky and into that. And it's funny because Mulder gets caught peeping on them because he's sort of investigating and keeping a close eye. And the guy comes outside and hits him and says that they're two consenting adults, so he should piss off. That was the basic gist of it. But then the real vampires, again, quote unquote, show up and kill him by feasting on him. Which is, it's even implied afterwards that they might not have even really been drinking each other's blood. They might have been using raspberry sauce that's in this like kitchen area they were getting kinky in, which maybe it's like a stepping stone, because she clearly does like getting cut and drinking the blood. Like, she's already into that. And I think that was one of the things that I really didn't like once her and Mulder were together and they were being all kind of flirty and sultry and all that, is that she's like, you need to clean up, and it cuts to him shaving, and I'm like, oh gee, I wonder what's going to happen when he's shaving so we can have a blood moment. And sure enough, she's like shaving his face, and she nicks him, some blood comes out, and she goes to lick it off her finger, and he stops her, and then she is, I guess, turned on by the fact that he is trying to fix her, I guess, and he's like, that's not who you are. So they kiss, seemingly have sex, and then the vampires show up, including the guy who had burned to death. So which I guess says that it's real to some extent. I feel like the rules are so convoluted though for these specific vampires, if that's exactly what we're dealing with here, that I don't know, it just that sucked any fun out of me that I was having. I thought this weird romance angle with Mulder and this Kristen character just felt really weird and forced. I just didn't get why Mulder was so enraptured immediately. I mean, obviously vampires are very sexual, and like the idea of the exchange of bodily fluids, and they've always been very seductive. That's a whole like part of it, of course. But it just kind of made me like not like Mulder as much this episode, because he just kind of like falls for her really easy. She's being sultry, and he just gives in, and arguably like, oh, he's in a rough place right now because he's missing Scully, which is a big problem right now actually. Like, we've had some really good, consistent quality this season so far, but one of the major sort of asterisks is that Scully's been very diminished because the actress is pregnant, and that's fair enough. But even if we have like a banger like next episode, that'll still be missing. It'll be the one nick on it is that, oh, it's a shame that it's just Scully. But there was one or two episodes this season so far where Mulder was mostly on his own, and they were pretty fun and pretty solid. This episode, I think, really suffered from having another voice here, and probably in a good writing sense. I guess that justifies to some extent that he doesn't have someone there holding him in place and keeping him in line and stopping him from doing anything too crazy. But it just wasn't that satisfying to watch. I almost lost some respect for him watching how he pursued this case. And this wasn't one where he believed in it, right? Obviously, he starts to like question, oh, maybe there's some truth to vampires in some way, shape, or form after the whole Burning Man thing. But it never felt like he passionately believes in the same way that he does with the aliens. So it's not like he was doing crazy things because he really believed in the outcome that he was looking for. It just kind of felt like he got really into a weird romantic entanglement. So it didn't feel as much to the character as his other obsessive, like, I'll do anything to get the answers sort of attitude that he normally has. At least then, it's always very consistently about getting the answers. This sort of pivoted and kind of just became this weird, I want to save her from the bad guys. But then she decides to sort of, I don't know, she finds like a loophole where she's technically a vampire now because she's drank some of the blood of a believer, which was on her, and she's going to take her own life, so that'll count as her being a vampire, so that'll count for killing the rest of them when she sets the building on fire. And one of the things is there's like a running motif throughout the episode where there's like a forest fire in California that you keep seeing off in the distance. So I think that's like a foreshadowing of this ending where she ends up setting the house on fire and they all get charred to dust. But this is one of these ones where, like, sometimes the little tag at the end of an X-Files episode can feel a little bit cliche, where it'll be a really good episode, but they'll do that little thing at the end where, oh, but the creepiest thing can still be out there, and it doesn't diminish the episode. I might, poke fun at it, but it's not a big deal. That's one type of, like, those endings. There's been good endings as well, don't get me wrong, there absolutely has been. But the other type of sort of bad ending, or the other type of ending where I feel it's not working, is the worst kind, which is this one, where how little I feel for this little, like, bitter moment where the firefighter tells Mulder, oh, there's, just dead bodies in there, there's just dust and bones, there's no bodies even, and Mulder just looks off all haunting before we cut to credits. This is the type of ending to one of these episodes where it makes me realize just how little I like care or even buy how much Mulder has become invested in this episode. I just never felt it. So the last, like, 10 minutes of this was particularly grating to get through. I didn't enjoy the horror of it. I didn't enjoy the direction. The other vampires felt very undercooked because there's 3 of them, right? Like, there's the main one who we saw burn and he comes back, but there's, like, the leader and the women who show up, but they've been so, like, just the odd glimpse of them throughout the episode that it doesn't really feel like that big of a deal when, she kind of kills them. I mean, she drives into one of them in the garage and she gets seemingly staked on, like, the wooden peg on the wall, and it's like, okay, all right, but we didn't really, like, get to know her or care about that vampire. I think cutting 2 of the vampires so it's just one vampire would have been at least a start. I don't think it would have solved all the problems I had with this, but it would have at least simplified that part of it a little bit and kept it a bit more streamlined. I think there's too many of the villains in this case. As for anything else, is there anything else I want to talk about? I think even just not even having Skinner a little bit this episode, like, where maybe Mulder has to call in and say what case he's working on and tell Skinner it's vampires. That might have been a fun scene. It'd have been another recurring character to see. It'd have been nice. I think, I always enjoy the chemistry that builds in TV shows with regular cast members. So when you have, like, this forced situation, which isn't their fault necessarily, but it's this forced situation where they're kind of just having Mulder on his own. Because even 2, I wouldn't say is normally enough. Like, this show typically revolves around 2 characters, right? And I think Supernatural, the amount of that I watched, I had the similar thing where it's a shame there's only 2 characters that are really regular and recurring, because you lose that kind of ensemble that I prefer in a TV show. But Mulder and Scully's chemistry is great, and Skinner's been a great sort of, like, addition to being this constant voice in the show. So not even having Skinner in this episode made it feel very isolated and very separate, and I will be absolutely gobsmacked if any follow-up to this ever happens. Will we ever hear about vampires again? I mean, maybe if they really want to do a vampire episode. I guess I kind of liked the idea that Mulder was wearing Scully's cross, and that kind of fed into the fact that we were doing vampires a little bit, but it's not. I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel at that point, looking for something to like. Yeah, it's a real shame because I actually really enjoyed how it was playing with the subject for like 15 minutes. And then once it became about Mulder becoming, forming a connection with this woman who kinda wanted to be a vampire but is actually on the run with them, once it turned into that, it very quickly started to fumble downhill because I just didn't buy the relationship. I didn't really like all the convoluted extra rules they were adding on. It felt like they overcomplicated everything in this story, and yeah, so yeah, not my favorite. Probably my least favorite, in fact, of the season, quite easily. Hopefully it's on my worst 3 of the season at the end of the season, because that would mean there's not too many other bad episodes. But that is my thoughts on 3, the X-Files episode. Let me know what you thought of this one in the comments. You can, of course, support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and help keep it all coming and keep the lights on over there by donating a little bit every month and getting some bonuses. But otherwise, that is me. You can also check out the other stuff that we're doing. I'm reviewing Person of Interest every week, classic Twilight Zone episodes. Right now, we've got some new shows ongoing, like Constellation and Shogun. So check those out as well if you would like. But there's a lot in the library, either on my own or with other people. So thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?